Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on 5 AI-enabled workflows that you can set up before peak season. Super excited to welcome you all today and to jump right into it. My name is Adam Ricefield, and I've been with Parapple for 4.5 years. Over that time, I've helped countless brands prep for peak season, building a couple thousand workflows over that time, alongside a lot of the brands that you see on the screen here. And I also run Parabola University, which is an awesome learning resource where if you're leaving today's call feeling like, hey, this could actually be valuable, I want to make progress on actually deploying AI and automation, that's going to be an awesome learning resource and similar structure to what we'll run through today. Um, to give you a quick overview of what we'll be covering in this session, first, we'll talk about how you can actually identify the best, most impactful use cases for your business to think about ahead of peak season. And then we'll get into the top 5 workflows that we're actively deploying with brands, how you can set those up, what the impact is, and I'll show you a few demos as well. We'll also run you through a couple other use cases that didn't make the cut for our top 5, but still could be quite high impact for your team ahead of peak season. And finally, we'll round us out with some Q&A. So throughout the session, if you do have questions, feel free to go ahead and throw them in the chat. Now, this is probably very top of mind for everyone on this call already, but just as a gentle reminder, we are 54 business days away from Black Friday. If you want time to actually deploy workflows ahead of time, test them, work out the kinks, you have 34 days until October 28th, which we're calling kind of the soft deadline for having a lot of these automations up and running. So I'm sure you're already feeling urgency, but the time is definitely ticking to get some of these up and running. But without further ado, let's talk about how we actually identify some of those use cases that will be most impactful for your team. I would be thinking about right now, where are things already falling through the cracks, right? Where is there a lot of variability in cost where if a 3PL is making a specific mistake, that could have a huge impact on your margins? Things like problematic integrations. Do you have instances where maybe you have duplicate orders in different systems? You're not having information flow from one system to another. Are there maybe discrepancies or edge cases that keep you up at night that you're constantly looking out for and pulling CSVs to see if anything exists? Are there constant complaints that your customer experience team is getting where maybe if you had better visibility, you could get ahead of some of these things? Are there reports that you're constantly auditing? Are you always asking your data team for support on a specific integration or report, but you can never get the bandwidth? If, as I'm running through these questions, something just jumps out in your mind as being a really obvious place to start, that could be an awesome initial automation. And a lot of times when we think about like the lowest hanging fruit here, we think about, yes, if we take a process that is currently fragile and we automate it, yes, you're going to experience time savings, but you're also reducing or eliminating human error, and you're kind of learning on the fly, and you can incorporate a lot of those process improvements to a process that you have documented and automated. You can also think about where can we actually improve visibility, especially around inaccessible data, automating a lot of those reconciliations and audits that you're currently doing in spreadsheets, things like setting up Slack alerts based on those reconciliations, and actually setting up a lot of the integrations and dashboards now so that you're not doing any CSV exports once you actually get to peak season. Now, to make this a little bit more concrete, let's talk about what those 5 use cases actually are that we recommend setting up ahead of peak season. First one, if you've seen much Parabola content in the past, is going to be an inventory reconciliation. The way that we actually determined which use cases we are running through here, first is going to be because they reduce the amount of chaos that exists in your peak season, right? Anytime you're chasing email threads, you're exporting CSVs to figure something out. The second one is to increase visibility across a lot of those hard to access systems, especially thinking about carriers, maybe invoices that you won't get until 30 days post peak, and then 3PL data sets. And finally, use cases that are actually going to make a material impact on your margins throughout peak season and ultimately customer experience. So first one that we'll cover here is going to be inventory reconciliation. This is the most bread and butter Parabola use case there is because it checks so many of those boxes that we just covered. You're probably familiar with this use case already. when we have discrepancies across our ERP or WMS or sales channels, really easy for those issues to kind of permeate throughout every facet of the business. And to resolve these things or identify them, it usually involves a long manual reconciliation process that can be slow, it can be error prone, things fall through the cracks, and ultimately during your busiest period of the year, process can become really unsustainable. And we've worked with brands that had operators working truly nights and weekends throughout peak just to identify and resolve these discrepancies. And so, if you kind of stick with the status quo of not reconciling or doing this manually, you might start to experience stockouts where we're seeing material revenue leakage. You might start overselling SKUs where maybe you have to cancel orders or have negative reviews and refunds. And then finally, this is where a lot of ops and CX time goes during peak season, where yes, there's the ops component of needing to do the reconciliation and updating systems, but there's also the CX component of needing to deal with angry customers that aren't going to get that order in time for Christmas, seeing delays on their orders, so on and so forth. Now, let's take a look at what this actually looks like in Parabola, giving you the highest level overview of these flows, which are all available as templates on our website. Now, jumping into an inventory reconciliation flow here, what we're doing high level is first pulling data from all the different systems in our stack. So that could be something like NetSuite, Shopify, and ShipHero, but whatever system you're using up in this integrations tab will either have a native integration with that system, or you can do something like pull in data automatically from your email or connect to whatever tool your 3PL maybe is working with via API. From there, the next step is really going to be standardizing all of this data so that it's nice and clean and we can combine it. Maybe things like cleaning up SKUs, editing our columns, and then ultimately combining all of this data, maybe based on a matching SKU across our different systems to really unify our data across our ERP sales channels and WMS. From there, here's where we can start to deploy some AI to figure out what those discrepancies are and how we want to triage them. So this is an example of Parabola's custom transform step, where you can basically just describe in plain language how you'd like to manipulate your data, and Parabola will use AI to transform those instructions into custom code that we apply against your data set. So here we're saying after filtering out retired SKUs, we want to figure out our discrepancies, and then we want to set a SKU status based on those discrepancies. We can see here we're going from 6 rows of data to 9 rows of data, where we're adding in those new columns for our discrepancies, which then gives us data that we can really easily action on. In this example, we're setting up a Slack alert whenever we do have those discrepancies. So if I jump over to Slack, we can see we're instantly getting a notification about discrepancies that exist between our different systems. And we also can create something of an inventory health dashboard here, where if we want just a real-time pulse of where do discrepancies exist, what's the health of our inventory, we can customize all of the visualizations and reporting that goes into this as well. Now, let's say you are building this from scratch and you're like, hey, we talked about how we have 30 to 4 days until we need automation set. Do I really have time to build something like this ahead of time? This is an instance where you can deploy AI agents in Parabola to actually build out this workflow on your behalf, simply by describing in plain language what you'd like to build. Here, I'm just saying, help me reconcile inventory between Shopify, Amazon, and NetSuite. And Parabola's going to say, okay, I understand what you want to do. Let's figure out a plan for how we're actually going to build this, and then start executing those tasks one by one. So Parabola, you can see here, created a task list. It knows that we need to import inventory, standardize our data, combine our data sets based on IDs, and it's going to immediately start executing those tasks. So here we can see it added our 3 steps that we can see here on the canvas. And next, it'll move on to standardizing and cleaning that data, updating this task list as we provide more context on what we'd like to accomplish. If you take nothing else away from this part of the session, hopefully it's that you can really just use plain language to start building these automations and building your logic to ultimately simplify and speed up the development process, so you don't need technical resources. You can really have anyone on your team build and deploy these use cases quite quickly. Moving on to our second use case here, this is going to be around fulfillment and SLA tracking. Now, some of the pain points that we see here, especially when your 3PLs are also dealing with their peak season, it's really easy for orders to get stuck or delayed, and you have no visibility. And ultimately, you're not noticing any of these things until customers have already been negatively impacted, right? Maybe this appears as a ticket in your CX queue, and ultimately you wish you knew about those dwelling orders far ahead of the customer. Now, some of the consequences here, maybe we're missing SLAs. Some teams will, if they know that an order has been dwelling for too long, maybe you're upgrading the shipping method so that you deliver on that promise date, but then ultimately you're eating into your margins. We also have seen teams have canceled orders, resulting in revenue leakage and ultimately more time for ops and CX teams just chasing orders and tickets. And so, just to give you a quick demo here of what this could look like, you can imagine we get started by pulling in some data from our 3PLs, whether that is connecting directly to a WMS, pulling in orders data via email. And then there's a couple different ways that we can build logic for helping us understand if something has breached SLA for a specific shipping method. One method that we see quite commonly is just building a simple reference table where we can say, hey, if a customer selected one of these shipping methods, this is what the SLA should be. And whether your logic looks something like this, or it's more complex if else logic based on a specific 3PL, specific product SKU, and shipping method, can really bake all of that logic into Parabola. From there, we can join our data based on shipping method. And very similarly, here we're using natural language to basically help us figure out, is something within SLA? Is something dwelling? Did we breach SLA on a given order? To ultimately help us do two things, right? One is just having a really solid reporting dashboard so that we can see on-time performance across our network. The other aspect here is identifying dwelling orders and actioning on those in real time. So we can set up email alerts to notify our team of dwelling orders with all of those attached. And maybe we want to send this to our CX team so they can follow up and notify the customer ahead of time. And we also can set up things like Slack alerts to really create that visibility wherever it's going to be most actionable for the team. We've even seen teams automate this end to end by doing things like setting up email alerts to notify the customer directly. But really, however much you want the human in the loop in this process to provide the best possible customer experience and manage your 3PLs, can set all of that up here in Parabola. Now, to keep us moving on to our third use case here, this one's going to be around 3PL packaging validation. What are we talking about here? We're talking about managing costs and keeping 3PLs accountable. Now, some of the pain points we see for brands, you might have a 3PL that consistently picks the wrong box or package size, which maybe isn't a huge deal during non-peak season. But once we get to peak, this can really drive up a lot of your shipping costs unnecessarily. And it's really hard to figure these things out until you're actually receiving the invoice from a carrier. And that's happening well after peak season, right? So what are some of the consequences here? It really comes down to cost for this one specifically. If you know your 3PLs are consistently selecting the incorrect box size and you can figure that out in real time, then you can really quickly go back to your 3PL, have receipts for, hey, for these orders, we know these boxes should have been used, but that wasn't the case. And then hopefully they can really quickly take action, resolve their packaging, cartonization process, and help bring costs back down to where they should be. Now, what does it actually look like to build something like this in Parabola? The first thing that we'd be doing is likely pulling in some of those package DIMs and weight data directly from your carriers. So this could be by setting up an API connection, which we can totally help you set up without requiring technical resources in Parabola, or maybe we're pulling in email data from a 3PL or a carrier, so on and so forth. From there, we can do things like pull in order and SKU data, maybe coming from someplace like NetSuite or Shopify, to basically figure out, using your method, what should the packaging bin for a specific order. From there, after we make that determination, we can then validate, hey, did the 3PL actually use the correct packaging for this specific order? And we can start to create some reporting dashboards to give us a good sense for 3PL packaging accuracy. We can also do things like set up thresholds where if we're consistently seeing, on 10% of our orders, on 2% of our orders, the wrong packaging being used, maybe we set up a notification and then we can go back to the 3PL with that set of orders so that we can address that error in real time. The fourth use case that I will talk about here is going to be around inbound and receiving monitoring. Before I get into this one specifically, if you have any questions so far, either on use cases that I've already discussed, or you're sitting here thinking, hey, we also have this process, a little different from what we've covered here. I wonder if this is a good use case for Parabola. Feel free to drop those questions in the chat, and we'll make sure to have time to hit on them at the end in our Q&A. Now, for inbound and receiving monitoring, what we're talking about here is a lot of the delays that maybe get noticed too late in the process for you to actually action on, right? These might be inbound containers or warehouse transfers that, these are peak seasons for your carrier, for your 3PLs as well. These might be discrepancies that exist between your POs and your actuals that you're not noticing until it's too late and it's already affected your stock levels across your different systems. And so without having something set up for this, we've seen teams have revenue leakage from stockouts. And ultimately, this is contributing to the scramble, right? You think a container is going to get to a 3PL on a certain day. The 3PL has staffed up labor so that they're ready to receive that. It's not there. You're seeing increased costs. And ultimately, you're chasing all of your vendors, your carriers, your 3PLs to try to figure out what's going on and actually deliver on your promise dates for your customers. Now, what could something like this look like in Parabola? When we think about hard to access data, this is going to be one of the big data sets that comes to mind, right? Carrier data that is maybe in a carrier portal, maybe it's accessible via API, or maybe you have carriers that are just emailing you when specific containers are delayed, which makes it really hard to bring together data from your email with the API data, with what your CX team is seeing, with what your 3PL is saying. So step one here is really just bringing all that data together. In this example, we are using a pull from email step to pull in a CSV file containing shipment data for all these different containers. And we're also pulling in data from another carrier, in this example, DHL, just so we can get all of that data in one unified view instead of checking all these different portals individually. Another area that we're deploying AI here is with this standardize with AI step, where every different carrier has a different way of saying something is in transit, it's shipped, it's arrived, all of these different statuses. So maybe we want to set up something where we're saying, hey, if you see anything similar to any of these three words based on the given carrier, we want to standardize that as in transit. So that when we consolidate all this data, everything is nice and unified and normified. From there, we can stack all of this data together. And then there's a lot that we can do once we have this unified data set, right? We can notify our team about changes in ETAs, milestone updates. Maybe we want to push data directly back into NetSuite or a TMS or any other system in your stack. Or maybe you want to create a consolidated shipping dashboard so you know exactly where every container is across your supply chain, across different carriers. Now that we've talked about establishing visibility across your carriers here, let's move on to the last workflow that we'll walk through in depth here. And that's going to be around sales price and discount validation. Now, for this use case specifically, something that we've seen with brands, especially that are setting up more complex pricing and discount tiers for peak season, is it's really hard to keep these aligned. And oftentimes you're not figuring out if a discount is being misapplied or there's a pricing discrepancy across systems until after a meaningful amount of orders have already been processed with those things in place. We also, as a consequence of this, we've seen teams experience things like pricing discrepancies across different systems. Maybe you're cutting into margins when you're having discounts misapplied. And so what it actually looks like to automate something like this in Parabola is first just pulling in all of that price and discount data from your ERP, from all your sales channels. And then instead of exporting CSV files and doing a lot of this reconciliation manually, you then can start to automate the joining of data across these different systems, automate your reconciliations, and ultimately set up a lot of the triggers that we've talked about in this call, right? Your email alerts, your Slack notifications based on discrepancies or mispriced SKUs. So that ultimately you have your most competitive, most accurate pricing being rolled out across all your different channels for all of peak season. Now, what are some other workflows that we didn't cover here that could also be really impactful for your peak season? First one, labor planning, really involving your 3PL and using some of those order estimates to make sure that your 3PL is properly staffed to handle your maybe inbound containers and the order volumes that you expect to have a good relationship with your 3PL and ultimately avoid any of those additional costs if the 3PLs are working overtime or not properly staffed for some of your expected orders. Second is going to be around carrier scorecarding. We've had teams constantly track cost and performance metrics in real time so that if they're starting to see for a specific carrier, costs are unexpectedly high or they're consistently missing SLA, it's really hard to change your parcel carriers in real time. But we do have teams reallocating some amount of their order volume to a different carrier based on the real time performance metrics they're seeing. Another one here is going to be around what can we do to make it easier for our CX team to find success and provide a great customer experience amid peak season. And something that we see a lot is you get a ticket, you need to go check 5 different systems to understand the context around a given system. You need to go look up the order ID associated with an email, see what SKUs they ordered, see if any of those SKUs are having any issues at your 3PL or was anything under-delivered, did we stock out any SKU? And as much as we can provide CX teams with all of that context, as soon as a ticket hits their inbox, the faster they'll be able to resolve customer questions, move on to additional tickets, and have faster resolution times. The fourth one I will talk about here is going to be around auditing your parcel invoices, right? This is going to be your highest volume parcel period of the year. So as many workflows as you have set up to catch those billing overages in real time, the better you're set up, especially because this is more of a nice to have than a need to have process. So with how crazy everything's going to be during peak, you're probably not going to take the time to manually identify any billing reconciliations. But if you have automation set up to serve you up those discrepancies in real time throughout peak, the easier it'll be for you to submit disputes with carriers, recoup any of those overages, and ultimately not bleed into your margins amid peak season. Now, to round us out here, we'll leave a couple minutes for Q&A. So if you do have any questions here, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll give one more minute to see if anyone has any questions there. All right. I guess we answered all the questions under the sun about prepping for peak season and deploying some AI-enabled automations. And so if this seems interesting, first thing I'll mention, you don't have to go at this alone, right? We've helped hundreds of brands set up these kinds of workflows to get ready for peak season. So if you're sitting there with questions around, hey, does this use case make sense? Is this a good integration for Parabola? Feel free to book a demo. We're happy to talk it through and connect you with an expert. You're also welcome to sign up for a free trial at parabola.io and use any of the pre-built templates we have to help you get a jump start on a lot of the processes we talked about here. Last thing I'll mention, if you do know someone who is prepping for peak season, they could see a lot of benefit from some of the use cases we talked about here, feel free to refer them our way. You could earn up to $2,000 if they end up becoming a customer. So hopefully a win-win for everyone involved. Thank you all very much. Good luck prepping for peak season, and let us know if you have any questions. Thanks a lot.